Hi, I am Dutch, the gaming storyteller, and wow, that was fast. Thank you for 10,000 subscribers. To celebrate this special occasion, I have reached deep into my bag of nearly unlimited content ideas. And don't you worry, a new unbiased review is coming soon, but what would be more fun to make for today? And what would be highly valuable to you guys? Alright, let's talk about how to properly write and make your own Space Marines Successor Chapter in 7 easy steps. There are many armies and many kinds of warriors in the grim darkness of the far future. But let's be real, the greatest amongst them are the brothers of the Adeptus Astartes. Whether you just got into the hobby or have been a long-time fan, the Space Marines will always have a special place in the heart of the community. Nothing shapes a hobbyist more than making their first Successor Chapter. Painting that first weirdly colored Marine, as you explain to your friends in the hobby store how they are secretly Alpha Legionnaire loyalists. I remember specifically about 8 years ago, making a chapter that was technically meant to be a Lost Legion, writing over 114 pages of lore and character background over the course of about a year. It's honestly a great way to explore the setting, and a great way to get to grips with how the vagueness in 40k lore can be used to your own advantage. But enough dilly-dallying. To start this video off, I quickly have to establish the basics of what a Successor Chapter actually is. Right after the societal collapse known as the Horus Heresy, there were 9 of the 18 active Space Marine legions created by the Emperor that turned to chaos. A blue lad known as Reboot Gilliman realized that having over 100,000 Space Marines in one singular army was maybe a bit too much power to handle for just one general. So to split this power and give the entire remaining Imperium some form of Astartes protection, he divided the remaining Loyalist legions into hundreds of second founding chapters. The legions being the first founding and their chapters being the second founding, each comprising of around 1,000 Astartes, led by a chapter master, a vast array of specialists, 10 companies led by 10 captains, and its own armada of spaceships and wargear. To control the quality of gene seed within these different forces, the reformed Adeptus Mechanicus would collect samples known as the gene seed tide. From these tests and extra resources, new chapters would be created depending on the needs of the Imperium. And now in the 42nd millennium, with the return of Gilliman and the Ultima founding, the galaxy is once again brimming with hundreds of brand spanking new chapters. This is where you will be able to form your chapter and write a relevant backstory. Maybe they descended all the way back from the 9 original Loyalist legions during the second founding, or were only recently established during the Indomitus Crusade. Maybe even using gene stock of less Loyalist descent. To establish your chapter, let's take a look at step 1 in this guide. I'd recommend writing along, pausing the video as you answer the sets of questions. And then by the end of the video, you should have a good feel for what your Successor Chapter will exactly be, act, and look like. Step number 1. Figuring out the basic idea. When creating your Successor Chapter, it's important to have at least some form of direction in which you will be able to write your characters and lore. A great way to start is by taking inspiration from real-world history. You will have noticed that many of the most loved legions and chapters were based from historical groups and movements. Black Templars being religious crusaders of old, the Minotaurs being inspired by the Spartans, and even the Ultramarines being famously similar to the ancient Romans. So, what culture will your chapter be a part of? What part of humanity, existing or even made up, do they represent? When writing down these ideas, make sure to regularly check whether this chapter may already actually exist. Sometimes it is easier to just take an existing chapter, paint one of their companies completely different, and say they are on a special mission or crusade, requiring some kind of different look. This way covering lore loopholes and possible issues on all sides. To further flesh out your basic idea, try to answer these questions. Who is their progenoid parent legion or chapter? Meaning, who did they descend from? When did they get founded? And try to answer why this would be the perfect legion or chapter to descend from. What is, or is not, their genetic gene seed flaw? Some legions have some deficiencies in their gene seed, like the Blood Angels falling for the Red Thirst, or the Dark Angels' inherent secrecy. What is their preferred war tactic? Maybe they use a lot of tanks, maybe a lot of jump packs, maybe some kind of cool weapon you don't see often. Are they Codex compliant? Most non-Codex compliant chapters do not reach much over 1,000 Astartes, so don't go hog wild making an entire legion here. What is their naming sequence based on? This should also tie back in with the culture you are choosing to derive your chapter from. Once you've written out all these basics, it should look something along the lines of this. A White Scar 28 founding successor, Aztec inspired, preferring ambush tactics, mainly throwing a large amount of very rare power javelins. Step number 2. What is your Successor's Chapter history? Successor chapters are usually created as a response for a specific problem. Maybe they are needed to guard the Eye of Terror, protect a specific high-value agri-world, or maybe as a deterrent to a long-time orc infestation. So, ask yourself, why did the Imperium specifically create this chapter? What purpose do they specifically fulfill? Now that you know why, when were they created? Is it a recent Tyranid problem? Then they must be created within the last 1000 years. Is it to guard the Eye of Terror? Then most likely they have multiple millennia of experience under their belt. How well are they known across the Imperium? What does their relationship look like with their other cousin chapters? The Inquisition, local Astra Militarum forces, and even the Adeptus Mechanicus. Try to figure out a way to tie these things back into your basic concept. If they are near a forge world, they will most likely have a higher chance of receiving at least half decent gear. What is the history of their home planet? How does the pre-established culture work? Does this affect their recruits? And, if it's an ancient human civilization, how did they fare during the dark age of technology? Step number 3. Looks. So, what does your chapter actually look like? Using the history and basic idea, knowing which culture and weapons would fit for your chapter, try to write a short description of what an average battle brother would look like. What kind of relics or scripts do they have on their armor? Do they use any form of ritualistic scarring or tattoos? Try to really focus on what would set them apart on the tabletop. What is their chapter icon? And how does it tie back into the chosen culture? And of course, I think for most people, the most important question. What's their color scheme? Pro tip, if you're quite new to the hobby, don't try to torture yourself with half and half or even quartered paint jobs. They look great, but let me tell you, as a 10-year-long commission artist, it's a pain in the ass to paint. Step number 4. Write some characters for your chapter. This one is pretty self-explanatory. Every army needs a leader, and every chapter needs a chapter master. Honestly, this is where most people kinda fuck up. When it comes to making an interesting and mainly balanced chapter, you need to have some flaws. Try to very much avoid making an accidental Mary Sue character. Chapter masters are strong, but Marnius Calgar and Tiberos the Red Wake are outliers. It's good to have characters with flaws, yes. They might be insanely well versed in one form of war, but some kind of Achilles heel will make them a lot more interesting to read about. This is where you will find most of your freedom when it comes to writing about the culture and what your chapter truly represents. Your chapter masters and captains are the exemplary force within the army. Brothers strive to be like them. And in the end, they are the public speakers on their brothers' behalf. Once you've figured out your main big lad, it's time to look at reinforcing specialists. Does your chapter use chaplains, tech marines, apothecaries, priests, hell, even exorcists? They are all vital roles to the chapter, so if your successor for some reason or another is lacking in any of these departments, try to find a very solid reason as to why. And lastly for characters, have any of them ever become a renegade or a traitor? And if so, why? Step number 5. Weapons and wargear. When it comes to wargear, it is mainly divided into two main forces. Personal wargear for battle brothers and a wide range of tanks and vehicle divisions. How well are they doing in these departments? Are there any weapons or wargear they have less access to than other chapters? Or are there any specific pieces of gear your brothers might carry around due to having some kind of sneaky contact back on Terra? How many tanks do they have? And which ones? Don't forget, if you have a large amount of tanks, you're gonna need a lot of tech marines, and a lot of goodwill within the Adeptus Mechanicus. How is their ship department? Please do remember, 99% of all chapters barely have an actual real fleet. When you see the phalanx of the Imperial Fists or the rock from the Dark Angels, you might get really excited. But remember, these are incredibly rare and far between. If they do have access to some terrifying archaeotech warships, try to find a really good reason as to why. Step number 6. What is your chapter's inherent flaw? In the last 5 questions, we have written out the basis for your successors. What is their culture? What are their tactics? Who and what are the characters? Now, to make a well-rounded story and well-rounded characters, it is time to add a specific flaw. This can be minor, but just enough to be an inconvenience when it comes to pass. Maybe it's a mental flaw on all the brothers, where they lose control at random intervals. Or maybe it's a genuine issue. Their gene seed mutates and makes them grow hundreds of eyes all across their face. Whatever the flaw may be, try to to look at it from the perspective of other Imperials as well. A brother that stops speaking and passes out is weird, but acceptable. An entire chapter with wings and dragon tails? That's not going to pass for most Inquisitors. Keep it simple and try to have it make sense. Sometimes less is more, and subtle flaws are what makes characters just that more interesting. Also, I think this is a good moment to check your power level for your chapter. Take any random loyalist Space Marine chapter and put it in a terrorized battle against yours. If your chapter consistently obliterates them no matter what they do, no matter what tactic they use, or whichever weapon they use against you, then it is time to tone down some of that uniqueness, or up some of those flaws. Please let me know down in the comments below what successor chapter are you working on. I'd love to see what you guys have come up with and if the tutorial was any help to you at all. Step number 7. Make your first model. Now that you've written down all your basic ideas, all the details you might ever need, some of the cool characters you have most likely already imagined a loadout for, it is time to make your first model. You will get to really put your idea to the test now. Maybe the color scheme works better or worse than you expected. Maybe those bits you planned on using for the helmet don't fit quite like you imagined. Or maybe you are scrambling through your bits box and find that perfect bit that absolutely completes your squad sergeant. This is really where the fun begins, and if you ever wonder how to make them just that much more interesting as you've built out your force over the months, maybe consider watching this video again. Because in the end, when it comes to the Warhammer 40k hobby, working on your own projects, your own armies, and learning about the lore in more ways than before, that's what it's really all about. I hope this guide helped you guys in figuring out how to properly make and write your own Space Marine Successor Chapter. I've absolutely always loved making my own chapters and legions, so for this 10,000 subscriber special, I think it was a great fit. Unbiased reviews coming soon once again. Thank you all for watching, please like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye. Also, I have a couple extra resources if you want some visual help with making your chapter. Check my description down below.